everyone, welcome to the Movieception Show. My name is Fariba, and today I wanted to quickly talk about Last of Us Episode 1. As you all recall, I did do a reaction video, but because I was not home, I was actually visiting my sister. I wasn't able to do a proper reaction video that I would typically, the way I would usually record for them. And having seen like the episode itself, I just wanted to do a couple, I just wanted to dig a little bit into the first episode because I think since it's airing, there's been a lot of discussions about it. There's been a lot of talks about it. There's been, a lot of new information that came out of it after, the episode had dropped. And I myself just could not stop thinking about the first episode of Last of Us. I think ever since then, I have been, thinking about rewatching it, and I actually ended up rewatching the episode just to kind of get a little glimpse, just to start to see a bit more details of the episode and discuss more about just the way that the whole so far kind of just the exposition of everything and how it kind of built up how it built up for this first episode that we saw with The Last of Us. So yeah, without further ado, so this is let's consider this more as like a pre-discussion leading up to episode 2, but also just discussing more about the first episode. So yeah, without further ado, let's go dive into it. So, as you all know, I've never played the game before, and I think in terms of just kind of my prior knowledge about it, like the knowledge that I do have, it just comes from my sister and just some of the more general things about the show. Like I already knew for one thing that this is going to be kind of like a zombie-esque type of show, just from the way that we're seeing a bit more of that survivalist type of genre. The fact that there are these infected individuals who are spreading this disease to the point where they are zombified. We've seen this a lot in so many movies and TV shows, whether it be The Walking Dead, the Day After series. We've seen this before many times, and yet when we look into a show, or even in the sense of the video game Last of Us, like one of the things I already knew about is that it's considered one of the best video games of all time, right? Like there has to be a reason for that. And I think one of the things I didn't know about was these two characters, Joel and Ellie, and just kind of this the significance of the relationship and how that becomes a big part of what is a Last of Us story. And of course, the fact that this was going to be adapted into a TV series, there was a lot of questions about it. Like we all know the reputation behind video game adaptations. We've seen that in like about 99% of the cases. They all fumble. They just do not do a great job of really just replicating the success that we see from the video games, whether it be the Resident Evil series, whether it be Uncharted. We've seen in more cases than not that it's there is just a really difficult way of really just adapting something that's one video game aspect and trying to put that onto the big screen that is a bit more in a more cinematic sort of way. And I think the closest that we probably would have seen to maybe a picture perfect, or not picture perfect, but just at least a decent adaptation of something was probably going to be the Sonic the Hedgehog series. Like that's maybe the one case where we've seen something actually executed well to what has been provided in the video game source itself. But now we're starting to see that Last of Us could be the difference of that, right? Last of Us, like leading up to that series, I think about a couple of days before the episode had dropped, there was already reviews dropping in about the series itself. It was actually hitting at 100% in terms of like Rotten Tomatoes. It dropped a little bit to like 96, but then once the first episode had dropped, that score went up to 99%, which is literally a near perfect score. Like that's something that you rarely ever see, let alone not just like a TV show, but for a video game adaptation, which it seems as if this is going to be the exception for what we've seen of like video game adaptations so far. And I think having seen that first episode not just once but twice now, there's a lot of reasons why this episode works, why The Last of Us has defied kind of the expectations of what we've seen from video game adaptations. And I think for one thing, you kind of have to kind of give credit for the fact that this is an HBO show. When we look into HBO shows, for the most part, like there's a reason why they are considered premium television, right? I think from my experience of watching any sort of HBO TV show, I'm more excited to seeing anything that's coming out of HBO than anything else from any other streamer. In this case, now that they do have HBO Max, but when it comes to their television, it's definitely you're definitely getting quality television on screen, whether it be Game of Thrones, House of Dragon, White Lotus, Chernobyl. Like all these shows are some of HBO's best for a reason, right? And so knowing that HBO were going to, have the rights to basically, Last of Us, I think that was kind of where, or not HBO, sorry, Warner Bros. Had the rights to Last of Us. I think, and the fact that it was going to be, done through HBO, I think that alone was kind of giving us a bit of a hope that this is going to be quality television. That we're going to get, not just any sort of video game adaptation, but something that's going to be in itself and also cinematic masterpiece in some way, like the way that Breaking Bad is, the way that, we've seen mostly Game of Thrones, or even the sense of House of Dragon that really has done such a great job in terms of its storytelling. And here it's that we do have sort of that expectations, and I think leading up to it, like seeing the reviews for it, just kind of solidifies that. I think another part of it is that, of course, when we are discussing Last of Us, a lot of people who have played the video games are talking about whether or not can they not only just execute the story, but also in terms of the casting, the performances. And I know there was a lot of, talks about this. Like when I first heard that Pedro Pascal was going to be casted as Joel Miller, right? Like as someone who has never played video games before, I kind of had at least a general idea about who Joel Miller was, and of course, like he's one of the main, characters of the Last of Us games. And knowing that Pedro Pascal was going to be casted as Joel, like I think from an instant I was really, really excited. I think for me, what really sold off for the fact, I mean, for me, just the fact that HBO Max, or HBO in this case, was, producing and distributing the whole, series, like I think that was what really solidified my expectations for the series. But knowing that Pedro Pascal was, cast as Joel Miller, I think that really just, made things a lot easier for me, just knowing that I'm going to enjoy this series, right? That was just a lot of the factors, and not just that, but to have Bella Ramsey, who I actually recall from Game of Thrones, like she played Lyanna Mormont, just for her to also be casted as Ellie, I already had a good feeling that this show was going to be great, right? I know that there was, at least from the gamer side, like from their perspective, there was a lot of, skepticism. I actually have spoken to my sister who has actually played the games, or at least has seen the gameplay. Like she's very familiar with it, whereas I'm not. So I'm also going to discuss some of her reaction as well. But at least call from the gamers' experience, a lot of them were skeptical about Pedro Pascal's casting, which was very unusual. Like I guess a lot of that kind of goes back to the fact that, Pedro Pascal hasn't really had too many leading roles aside from The Mandalorian. And I mean, for The Mandalorian, he is mostly covered, right? Like he's wearing a helmet all the time. And I think that a lot of them, and I think a lot of them were just thinking about the whole mystique of itself. Like, can he actually he doesn't look like the typical Joel Miller that you would think of. But for me, for me, I'm very, I know a lot about Pedro Pascal's work. I've seen so many of his projects, whether it be Narcos, whether it be, Mandalorian, whether it be, Wonder Woman, or Equalizer. Like, I've seen so much of his work to kind of realize just the versatility that, Pedro Pascal can put into his characters, right? Like, he knows how to play, because again, most of the time we see him as a supporting character, right? Whether it be, what is it? We Can Be Heroes. He didn't really have a big role in there. And lately, I think the latest project he was in with The Bubble, which again, that was not a great movie itself. But in terms of like other cases, when it be like supporting characters, we have seen him in things like, in terms of his prior work, like I mean, Game of Thrones, for instance, like Oberyn Martell was more of a supporting character. Or like I think in some cases we've seen him play a lot more antagonistic characters, whether it be Massimo Lord from the Wonder Woman 1984 film, or like in Equalizer where he played that that evil dude, like we eventually learn it later in the end of that episode, or even a supporting cast like the way he played Catfish in Triple Frontier. Like again, we've never really seen him play more of a leading role than being a supporting character, and I get a lot of that skepticism, but for someone like me, again, who has watched a lot of his, content before, he has played leading characters before, like for one part, like Narcos. I think one of the things I enjoyed about Narcos was Pedro Pascal. I think, like for me, I can recall right now that I actually started to learn who Pedro Pascal was from Narcos. Like that was my exposure to who Pedro Pascal was, and I think that one of the reasons why I enjoyed Narcos so much, of course, of the whole story aspect about Pablo Escobar, and I mean the guy who played Pablo Escobar did such a great job at it. And I think the second best thing about that show was, without a doubt, Pedro Pascal, who played Javier Pena. I think one of the reasons why I was so happy about season 3 and seeing him return was actually one of the greatest things about the show, because he was such an incredible actor. Just the way that he's able to kind of show this complexity that is Javier Pena. Yes, he's a DA agent. He does go into some, really, fishy way of doing his, methods of trying to investigate people. But at the same time, there's something that is, a bit moralistic about him, the way that he's trying to get, try to fulfill his job. I think that he really accomplishes that in the third season. I think the third season where it's really his season, just because, Stephen Murphy's not in that season. It's mostly just, Javier Pena, and that's, of course, led by Pedro Pascal, who really does a great job of really carrying out, the third season right there. And I think that's one of the reasons why I knew that he was going to be great. But not just that, but again, I mentioned this in my reaction video and the discussion at the end, but like there's one movie that I really feel like kind of basically like it's exemplary, like, way of showing, Pedro's acting, that basically, is example of who he would be as Joel if he had already not been in the series, right? He played in Prospect. He plays kind of a similar type of character, not like in the way that's totally like Joel, but there's definitely the mannerism, the way that he, his style, just the way that he thinks, his personality. Like a lot of that resonates so much with, Joel in Last of Us. And Prospect, he plays Ezra, where he does play a bit more of an antagonistic role. At least in the beginning, he does. Where he, if you watch the movie, you will know what I'm talking about. I don't want to spoil it, but but eventually, what ends up being a big part of that film is his journey with this young girl named C. And yeah, they don't trust each other, but they go through this journey where they now have to survive in this planet that they're in. And as much as the fact that they have their own thing going on, given just kind of their conflict earlier, as well as the fact that Ezra isn't the most heroic type of character. He's actually more of like, somebody, not, I wouldn't say villainous, but more antagonistic, right? That, he isn't the type of character you would say you would want to trust. And yeah, we see this journey between C and Ezra in that film, Ezra being played by Pedro Pascal, and just seeing their journey and how they're trying to get out of this planet and have to like kind of force themselves to trust each other, if it means having to survive the planet that they're in and trying to get through some of the obstacles. And for me, that felt like that's, if you think about that, that's basically kind of what's happening in Last of Us, or at least that's what I got from the exposition or the first episode from Last of Us, that, with Joel, we're kind of getting a similar aspect of him. Now, of course, Joel isn't like an antagonistic character. He isn't somebody who, is always, full of himself, who's only thinking about himself. Of course, that's not the case in this episode. Like from what we saw in the first episode, he isn't that type of person. He's somebody who does care, but also someone who's so, broken that he doesn't really have the feelings that he used to have before. Like he lost hope in everything in what we saw in Last of Us. Yet he's still going on this journey where he's taking this cargo of some sort of, trying to fulfill this job that he has, which eventually I'm going to assume is going to kind of lead up to kind of this father-daughter sort of relationship that we're going to see being explored in Last of Us. Again, I'm not totally familiar with Last of Us, but that's kind of what I believe the whole aspect of Last of Us is. And that's why, for me, like, seeing Pedro Pascal in the first episode, like, I think, like, after the first episode had dropped, I think a lot of naysayers who were, criticizing Pedro Pascal previously when he was initially casted have now really been proven wrong. I think that first episode has really set that. For one thing, like the way that he's really able to embody Joel, like pre and like before and after the outbreak. Like again, you have to give credit to Pedro Pascal for really showing this versatility, this rawness. I mean, I actually rewatched the episode just to see kind of the way that Joel changes from this guy, who's just, happy, kind of minding his business, but also showing how much he loves his daughter in the beginning of the episode, and just seeing how he, and then, when the outbreak does happen, he becomes this really, fierce, father-like character who really wants to, make sure that he's protecting his daughter, only to see that, all hope is gone for him the moment he loses her. And then not just seeing that, but just to see 20 years later, the flash forward to 2023, and how you can just tell from how he is, like he hasn't smiled in a day, because he's basically lost everything, or almost lost everything aside from his brother, right? But you can tell like he no longer is that humanistic type of character that we saw from before, right? Like he it's like he lost faith in everything. That's basically what I'm trying to get the point of. And you gotta give credit for Pedro for really just, naturally, organically kind of showing the changes that we've seen from who is Joel Miller. And again, hopefully when we get to the second episode, we'll start to see more of this progression, how much, Joel changes now that he is with Ellie. Now he needs to transfer her to somewhere, and again, just like seeing the exploration of their relationship. But again, I mean, just to see Pedro Pascal just playing him is just one of the greatest things about this series. Like, I mean, I'm just keeping an eye on him. Like, I think that for me, like, this is probably one of his best performances I have seen so far. Like, having seen shows like Narcos and Mandalorian and Prospect and all these roles that he's played before, I think that this is probably the strongest I've really seen from Pedro Pascal, because this is a role that I think is probably the most challenging aspect that he has ever taken in his whole career. Because I mean, again, for one thing, he typically does play supporting roles, or he plays something that's like an antagonistic role. So in that case, that still puts him more in a supporting role type of situation. And in the cases of where he has been a leading role, they haven't been as big or has been well renowned in the way that Joel Miller is, right? Aside from characters like from his character Narcos, or in Prospect or whatnot, right? So yeah, that's why I'm like, I think going into like after having finished the episode, like that was one of the big takeaways I got out of it. Just seeing again the way that Pedro Pascal really puts that emotionality into Joel. I think that's probably the high point of what we got so far from the first episode. And I mean, not to even like let that go away from Bella Ramsey. I think she's also done an amazing job as well. Having now seen the episode again, like I can see a bit more of that fierceness that I recall from Lyanna Mormont from Game of Thrones. I believe that's, I think, her most well-known character at this point. I don't know if she's done too many projects before, because I know there was a time where she took a break, but then of course she got casted as Ellie, and now she's in the show. And I think so far she's also done a great job as well, just showing a bit more of this feisty, Ellie that we see out of her, but also someone who's a bit more calm and cool about everything. That's something vibes I get out of Ellie, and I think so far Bella Ramsey did a great job as well. I mean, I think as we get into more of these episodes, we're gonna start exploring more of Ellie and starting to see Bella really just show off so much of her performance in playing Ellie as we get more into these episodes, right? And then not just that, but I mean, from what I've seen so far, and I think one of the last things I really want to talk about is just more so just how it's been managed to, replicate the source material, how it's able to use the source material. And yeah, as someone who's never played the video games, like I don't know much about it, but as someone who has a sister who has played, Last of Us and seen the gameplay, I've actually at least seen a few footage of it. I think mostly just the outbreak part itself. Like as I mentioned in my reaction video, the one part I do recall from the gameplay is actually the outbreak part itself, where we kind of follow with Joel and Sarah and how they're trying to escape from the outbreak that's happening, trying to get to safety. And I recall a lot of those scenes, and when I was comparing it to the show, I definitely was just in awe as to like how it managed to really be accurate in terms of just replicating this step by step scenes from that outbreak scene from that we saw in the video game, and how they managed to really just replicate everything like that in the TV show and do it in a way that still works, like in a manner that really works in a television approach to it. And that's what really amazed me, is that the fact that even all of that, even the fact that they do have to make some changes, whether it be to the story, whether to how they're going to showcase some scenes, they still manage to make sure that the big part of trying to do the Last of Us story from the video games is just to make sure that they are close to the material as possible. And I've seen that so far from the first episode, that they've done an immaculate job with that. And even with that being the case, you also have to compliment the fact that with the changes that they have done, it works. Like it's meant to be changed in a way that would work, that would fit well into a TV standard, right? I think what we're talking about, of course, is the prologue that we see in the first episode, where they try to explain about the cordyceps, or at least explain kind of giving an illusion, or just like a premonition of what is going to be the outbreak that's going to happen in 2003, right? Like the whole beginning aspect where we have that scientist who talks about funguses and how we've known so much about viruses, we know so much about bacteria, but it's very unusual to find fungus as being kind of the cause of like, human sickness. And as somebody who has, studied a lot of sciences, I think what really was amazing watching the second time around is kind of how they managed to be a bit more like, I mean, it's not like everything is accurate in the way that they're trying to portray the whole situation with fungus is like, I don't know much about fungus in the way, but I think what I do know is that there's a reason why viruses are very hard to, are very hard to treat because they are non-living things. So it's really hard to, like, even when we do have things like antivirals or antibiotics or anything like that, it's really hard to kind of track them down because they are non-living things that are hiding within, our cells. And that's what's causing, people to get sick with viruses, whereas bacteria is a bit more easier to treat because we do have antibiotics for them. And I think that in this case, we're seeing a bit more of a case with funguses where focuses are not something that we commonly, see as like, diseases or like that, impact humans, as they do explain that in the prologue. But also kind of just comparing that to kind of like with drugs, right? Like, I mean, when we think about funguses, we do think about the fact that a lot of them are, associated with drugs. I mean, that's what we always use the word mushrooms, right? Like, I mean, mushrooms are basically funguses. And so I think that with all of that, the way that they really managed to kind of just be creative in, trying to explain sort of the outbreak that's going to happen, but also try to be as scientific as possible in a way that it would still make sense. I think that that's something I have to applaud for. Because again, as someone like me who is a bit more familiar with the scientific stuff, I think just watching it, like a lot of it kind of did make sense. I think the fact that they managed to kind of integrate the whole evolution of it makes a lot of sense. Like, who knows, maybe evolution is going to be the case for causing some of the biggest outbreaks, whether it be funguses, viruses, or bacterias. And in this case, like, they do make a point of, well, with evolution, things can change with how viruses, bacteria can really impact everything. Like the way that we saw with COVID-19, really doing all that, like things do change as a result of what's happening in the environment around us. And I think that they really did such a great job of doing that opening sequence that it's like it kind of does give you that terror of it, and just seeing the reaction from the people in the crowd was well done. And I think that that really sets up the tone for everything that's going to happen in this show, and leading up and building up what is going to be the first episode, right? And just a couple other comments I do want to say, of course, is that having heard some of the comments that we've gotten from the showrunners, kind of how they want to execute the series, right? This was supposed to be a show that was supposed to be 10 episodes, but then it got dropped down to 9 because they decided to combine 2 episodes. And that is because, of course, one of the things that the showrunner, I believe it was showrunner or the producers, one of them, had mentioned that they wanted to, they decided to combine 2 episodes because the initial idea of what they had for the 2 episodes was separate. It made the first episode kind of hard to really follow through, particularly the fact that they, the big part of the storyline isn't just, Joel, right? It's Joel and Ellie. And I recall from my sister's reaction, right? Like, I mean, because for me, I think one of the fun experiences of watching Last of Us with somebody who has seen the game, it's just how they feel about it, how they're comparing it. Again, for someone who hasn't played the games, I'm not totally familiar with what is the same, what is the difference. But seeing from my sister's reaction, like, I mean, she was, of course, I think she also kind of got her doubts away in the fact that, eventually the first episode really did exceed everything. But not just that, but one of the comments that she did make at the end of the episode is that she definitely felt like the way that the episode ended was an interesting part of it. She didn't expect that to be the ending of the first episode, and I'm assuming it's because of the way that the story is told in the, in the game itself. I'm going to assume that what she thought would have been the ending of the first episode was probably going to be a bit, it was supposed to have ended a bit earlier. Like, she never told me where she thought the show could, the episode could have ended, but I'm going to assume that the episode could have ended with, showing Ellie briefly at the end, how she's prison, like the very first thing that we see of Ellie, that probably could have been the ending of it. Which I'm assuming that's what my sister would have thought was going to be the first episode, but instead decided to end it off with what is going to be kind of the beginning of their journey to drop her off in her designated spot, to her place that she needs to be. And I think that's where my sister may have that's where her reaction is, in terms of like, oh well, I did not expect this to be where they would have stopped. And I think that that's what she meant by that. So yeah, I think again, just seeing her commentary was great just for the fact that I've never seen it from as like hasn't played the gameplay or haven't seen the gameplay, and again, just the first episode itself, like I think again like the way it does such a great job of executing this zombified sort of storyline again, like this survival genre that we've seen so many times, whether it be The Walking Dead and all that. The fact that this is a show that really just takes things in a different direction, trying to be focused on not just the outbreak itself, but the relationship, the people, just seeing how they are changing because of what's happening around them. I mean, just seeing this from the show, like I instantly was hooked. And again, by the time I got to the end of it, like I just could not stop thinking about it. I could not stop talking about it. Even after a couple of days since the episode dropped, I've just been, I've just been wanting to, continue on the series. Like I just want to see what the next episode is going to be about, and now we're about to get that with episode 2. But yeah, that's all I really wanted to say about it, just because I felt like I didn't get the chance to really discuss the episode in detail. But yeah, that's all I have to say about it. I can't wait to see the second episode that you're going to be dropping tonight. But yeah, let me know what you think. Again, have you watched the episode again like I have? Have you caught a couple of things? There's some things that I'm starting to really catch on about in terms of like the fungus stuff. Again, there's that theory going on regarding funguses, which I can't wait to see if that's going to be the case. But yeah, let me know what you think. Have you seen it again? What are your thoughts? Are you excited for episode 2? Because I am. What are your thoughts so far in terms of just the show itself as well as the performances? Let me know in the comments down below, and make sure to like and subscribe.